Hi, everyone. So excited to be here with my good friend, colleague, and cohort, Karl Dakin, who is focused on funding as his primary interest and helps so many people in so many diverse industries become successful with their funding efforts and brings more than just funding to the table. Also, Karl is the head of his own shows. Tuesdays, Karl has his show, and then Thursdays has his community redevelopment show coming from Baltimore area as far as most of the people involved. So I really promote what Karl's doing because I believe Karl brings a lot of value, not just because he's a good friend. With that said, chat's wide open. The word of the day is initiative. I had the pleasure of sitting in on Karl's show and co-hosting yesterday, and the word was communication. And what's curious is I had already planned tomorrow's show with Kelly being communication. So double up, kind of sequel to it. If you're interested, it'll be Kelly Stanecki and Dave Snell tomorrow. And while we're here, we might as well go forward with this show. Karl, love to have you give a quick update and your first thoughts on initiative.
Um, yeah, so as I mentioned on my own show yesterday, I took last week off on vacation, and like all good intervals for an entrepreneur, that means that the work didn't just get shoved off on somebody else. It just got delayed until I got back. So I'm scrambling still to get back up to speed and work with a number of old and new initiatives that range in funding from grants from federal agencies, new housing, community redevelopment, new technology here and there, new ways of doing things in the funding industry itself. And One of the things I do from time will take somebody's idea for raising funding and do a quick review. And I'm doing one of those right now on a fractional investment ownership in real estate to facilitate the average person to have a chance to invest and not limit it to wealthy people. And also potentially bring capital to projects that otherwise aren't going to make the list for sources of funding. I publish a daily newsletter right now. I'm doing a whole series on different funding sources that most people don't know about that they might want to consider. Yesterday's edition was on community foundations. I haven't written today's yet, so I'm not sure what my topic is going to be later today. But Don, thanks for selecting the word initiative. I like ambiguous words because I didn't know if you meant the verb initiative or you meant the adjective initiative. Do I have initiative or am I engaged in an initiative? So I'm confused and I'm seeking some clarification.
Well, great. And that's why I came up with the word for clarification. And you're right, initiatives and initiative has so many ways of being integrated into a conversation. And naturally, taking an initiative is a verb. Having an initiative is a noun. And initiatives can continue to transport themselves in many different avenues. I know, like coming up on the election, there's a lot of initiatives or ballot initiatives that people are focused on all over the country. And, I think that's the beauty of semantics is application and context. With that, we've got a stellar group that's launched really fast. Greetings from Osman. How they're all there may be may daddy. What's curious about that is usually that's a term of respect that people have. So it's not playing off of anything. Carrie's here. What did the mold say when it had its picture taken? Cheese. Well, that does come together very nicely. Kelly's here. Kelly will be here tomorrow in person, live, and in living color with Dave Snell. Kelly's one of the best, if not the best, that I've been able to encounter on LinkedIn, and we worked together for about 20 months on our Thursday shows, and they only get better. So really appreciate your support, Kelly, and your presence today. And with that, I'll swing it back to Karl, who can kind of bring his true full meaning to initiative.
So I refer to each of the projects I work on as projects. That's kind of the best catch-all term, but initiative could also be a term, meaning that there's typically something new, something different. And so when somebody talks about being engaged in an initiative, I take it as not the same old, but this is a new venture, a new opportunity, something that is going to encounter a variety of challenges going forward because it is new. Innovation, any kind of creativity for doing something new is automatically going to have these additional challenges over doing something that's been done over and over and over again. And one of those is in the finding of funding, because almost every initiative starts with empty pockets or near empty pockets that are not enough to cover all the expenses and winding up this activity that wasn't there before. At the same time, since Don made this an ambiguous, term, we can get into initiative as a description of an entrepreneur, somebody who is willing to take on that adventure, that new opportunity, who's willing to break out of the box, to get out of the rut, to do something new and different. And like Carrie, who's commented that he's dealing with an attempt to basically redefine himself in a new job. This is a type of initiative. Anytime you change a job, whether it's to a payroll job where you actually get a check on a regular basis, which I don't know what that's like recently, so I can't comment too much on that. But we've talked in the past, back and forth through Don's show, that Carrie has this whole capability of telling jokes and activities. And there's a potential in there as an entrepreneur that I would immediately go, well, what if you published a book on jokes? Or what if you created a service, where you could supply a joke a day to everyone who's doing a LinkedIn live show? We could go on, along that line, but it takes creativity, it takes commitment, it requires understanding as best you can where you're going to go when you often are stepping into something that hasn't been done before or hasn't been done well enough that you can borrow best practices from somebody else. So I work with entrepreneurs who are doing startups all the time. I get ideas on my table that I look at and I'm like, I have no idea what you're going to do because it's just too complex or it's so far out there. At the same time, there is so much room for improvement in the world today. I mean, I ask everybody, are you happy with the way things are today? If not, maybe you should do something differently. And one of the things you can do is try a new product or new service. You can set up new relationships. You can start a new business. Just depends on how extreme you want to go. So when we talk about initiative, it's that get up and go. It's like what gets you out of bed in the morning that will, move you forward, give you that motivation to take on these challenges, knowing that they're there. My greatest concern is when I encounter a newbie, brand new rookie entrepreneur who simply doesn't know what they don't know. And they say, I'm going to engage in this activity. And I'm like, are you aware? This is the warning sign. Are you aware of all the different things that you need to do? And the general answer is no, I didn't know all those problems existed or the time it's going to take. I'm involved in a project now where we're getting ready to set up a series of community investment funds. We've been working on this since April, and we're moving at high speed by every metric except cash flow. And we had hoped that we were going to get some pre-development or some seed funding in as early as July. And my calendar says it's October, so we're about 3 months behind. And this is a common challenge for a startup is the initiative needs money, needs resources. So everybody's been kicking in time and money, and we're doing that with knowledge as experienced professional entrepreneurs. Whereas if I were a startup, I might already be in the hole. I might have already created a problem I can't get out of. I may have inadvertently put myself in a position of failure for lack of what I know. My initiative is there, but my knowledge did not match my willingness to get up and get going. So we have lots of topics that we could potentially dive down into in terms of what is an initiative, a true opportunity from an entrepreneurial standpoint, or we could talk about what gets an entrepreneur up in the morning, day after day after day, when they're facing challenges that maybe the average person doesn't have to meet.
Yeah, I like that. And, what comes to mind the more I think about initiative is initiate is the foundation to initiative. And part of initiate is being proactive, so you're always looking to move the ball forward, bring people with you, bring resources with you. It's a comprehensive approach because like Karl had mentioned, you need to get all your pieces of the puzzle or all your ducks in a row in order to be successful. So if you have 5 big initiatives that are required to start a project or complete a project, you've got to cover all your bases and have some initiating activity or effort behind all of those. It doesn't take much to bring a house of cards down, and it's really how do you become more foundational where you're building on rock instead of sand. And also what initiatives are you focused on? And there's personal initiatives, professional initiatives, all kinds of initiatives. So how do you prioritize? How do you stage them? And then how do you build on them? Because too many people are fishing in too many ponds and they're not catching very much because they're running around from one pond to the next, seeing what they caught or didn't catch. And I think a lot of times prioritizing on 1 or 2 key areas and then getting them right so you can then add and complement to them is usually a pretty good approach. We've got Omar here, who's been a more consistent part of the audience and was on the show last week. I'm going to be on actually the Tournament of Champions for Zoom party because I did win my heat, if you could call it that. I guess I'm going to be paired with not Beverly, but Leslie Flowers again, another wonderful collaborator and colleague of mine on LinkedIn. Complimented my shirt. Are you making a new trend? Well, that's part of initiative is sometimes you got to move forward even when no one tells you to or when you don't have to. But there's a point in time when you find, hey, things have changed, time to change things. Because, what's interesting is last week I didn't wear my hat for a day just to make a change. Some people never saw me without the hat. But, what was interesting is they all noticed it immediately and on 3 different fronts. And then today I put on a new shirt, and there's nothing like a brand new shirt because it'll never look as good as the first day you put it on. So I appreciate that, Omar. And I think that's part of initiating or being proactive is Omar just changed the whole conversation, or at least a part of it, by his comment. So by initiating, you're not only moving yourself forward, you're moving other people around you with you, whether it's forward or not. That's an opportunity for change. And change is, I think, what Karl's all about, taking concepts, ideas, forming them into initiatives, which then can be the foundation to bigger projects and efforts. And it also demonstrates the really beauty of collaboration and collective activity and support. So part of initiative, I think, is not only what you do, but what you help other people do help them create more initiatives, because you're better off spinning a web of more and more people getting involved and knowing their initiative that they have to do than everybody coming to the party with the same potato salad. So you want to bring something different, something exciting, something new to the table, and it makes everything more interesting, because a lot of what Karl does takes time. And the key is, how do you keep yourself in the game, interested, moving forward, taking initiative? And that energy level makes so much difference, especially for, how you project and how people perceive you. Um, Carrie says some of my jokes are borrowed from the internet. Some just roll out of my head. I will see about that. So he has heard you, Karl, and hopefully will take the initiative to seeing how he can expand on his core talents. With that, Karl, what's your new thoughts?
Well, back to Carrie for a moment. I would suggest that he look at the cartoon Gaping Void. It comes out almost daily, and they put out a cartoon which is sometimes humorous, sometimes in a strange black humor format. But then they put a commentary with it, so it's a combination of an opinion stated in observation, coupled with a comic idea, and it comes out daily. And they sell the cartoons as well as other services and support behind that. But there are lots of different ways of bringing jokes to the market at the right time, right place. And I think that I always like Gaping Void because it typically comes in at the end of the day when I need a little bit of comic bounce to even out all the challenges that I've been dealing with. But one of your comments, Don, that I think is important, you talk about having your fishing line in too many different ponds at the same time. And I was in a conversation with one of my associates yesterday who decided he liked an opportunity so well that he was going to commit 100% of his time to that particular activity, and it hasn't generated any revenue yet. So he's in a revenue stress position at the moment. And it was something he took on his own initiative. He didn't ask me or my opinion. My opinion, since 9/11, when I got caught with only one fishing pole in one pond that got destroyed by the terrorist attack on the towers, I have always fished in multiple ponds at the same time in order to assure that I don't have one pond with no fish. I'm always looking for multiple ponds to do that. And one of my advice to people who think about becoming an entrepreneur is, don't quit your day job until you know that the entrepreneurial venture is going to pay for itself. You've got cash flowing, you've got product finish, you've got that. There's a lot of myths out there in the entrepreneurial world, like you can't succeed till you jump off the cliff, or you go for it all. And I'm going, yeah, and that's a short road to bankruptcy, divorce, a whole bunch of other things. Craziness in planning doesn't get you there. The fact that you don't know what you're doing is not a justification to do something you don't know how to do. It's a kind of a circular logic, kind of a flaw in thinking. But if you are going to fish in multiple ponds, and I kind of recommend everybody have multiple revenue streams, no matter who they are, from different sources that are not codependent, are not tied to each other. As you described it, you have to come up with, how do you prioritize these? And so one of the few books I read early in my career, out of hundreds of books on businesses that I thought had true value, was called The Theory of Constraints by Goldratt, who has since passed away. But he basically said every problem is like a knot. If you can find that one string that's at the right point in the knot, the whole thing will come unwound and everything works. And it's kind of like a first domino theory, where if I can figure out which domino to push over, then I get a cascade of activities that come out of that. So as I do strategic planning and thinking and looking at different initiatives that I may work with, I stop and I go, can I do this? First question. And the second one is, will it have a positive impact on any of the other things I'm working on without creating that dependency that would make it a singular initiative as opposed to independent initiatives. And I do that every morning. I get up, I go through all the list of everything I'm working on. I look at, ask myself, is if I do any of these things, is it going to positively impact any of the other things I'm working on? And so, like, if I develop an agreement for a particular type of relationship, can I use it on one of my other initiatives? If so, that's a good thing. If it's not, then I have to treat it as a standalone investment of time, which makes it more expensive. Whether if it becomes a template and I can reuse it in other projects, then I'm building my base, my investment has more value. And so I can do things today. Like somebody says, well, they sent me a resume and said, could you rewrite that with AI? I said, sure. And it took me all of 2 minutes, and I gave it back to them, and they were so happy. They go, it must have taken you hours. I go, no, I learned how to use AI. I use it on lots of different things. So this makes this an easy favor to give to someone. And it becomes a building block as a skill, a knowledge, and so forth. So yes, I do preach fish in multiple ponds, but I do want to select the ponds. I want to make sure there's as much fish in the ponds as I need. But I'll fish in the ponds at different times, even though we call it parallel thinking or parallel tasking. You're actually doing one thing at a time in sequence. It's just a matter of which sequence at which time and your selection of which one you want to go first that gets involved. But if you think of your long-term goals and which of them are advancing your long-term goals, and you pick those things that get you there better, faster, that gives you a weight that you can assign to it. And then you ask yourself, how do any of these things complement each other? And those then allow me to pick and choose amongst dozens of stuff that cross my desk all the time. Or people go and look at this. What do you think of that? So I feel good that I see a flow of ideas and businesses and entrepreneurs and funding opportunities, but you can't do them all. So you do have to pick and choose, and you need a system for that, a strategy for how you go about choosing opportunities to move you forward. And so there are different things to look at, and then you have to figure out what you're going to do for yourself. What are you capable of by yourself or with others? And if you can't do it by yourself, then you need a team, and now you've got more challenges.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, Carl, because it makes me think that balance is so important with everything you do. And when you're talking about fishing in different ponds, you're already fishing in certain ponds before you even get started on your business initiatives, right? You've got your family pond, you've got your relationship pond, and you can go on, your hobby pond, and really it's a factor of time investment. Because if you have to require more time in one thing, it's going to be at the expense of something else. It may be yourself, maybe sleep, it may be travel. And then how do you justify and compensate for it? Because you're going to have immediate impact on what you were investing in already, and maybe long-term return on what you're investing in now. And, if it was just purely dollars and cents and just everything you did went towards business, it would be a lot easier to appreciate and identify. But I think that's really the key, is how do you initiate relationships that can allow you to open a road and backfill, right? So there's short-term, let's say, contribution that's a lot of your time. And then where does that kind of move over to be shared or taken over by somebody else? And now it's just flex initiative, where a little it's heavy here, and then, like Carl said, with templates, it gets lighter, and there's visibility. And when there's visibility, there's communication. It's easier to say to your family, well, for 2 weeks, I'm going to have to be in Boston, and I won't be able to do what I used to do here, but I'll be back, right? And as long as people know what the visibility or what the future is, it's not a major disruption, especially when they understand the context. If we get this project, we're going to move into that house we always wanted. It's not always materialistic, but there is a overall benefit to all parties who may not be directly involved in it. And, it also gives you some freedom if you understand, like I think Karl made a great point with constraints or restraints, is you only, it's like diving in and trying to recapture something from the water. You only have so many seconds that you can go underwater and breathe, and you need to kind of calculate that. So safety and health is the main important value. And I think Karl also brings up the collateral benefits. There's direct benefits, but hey, if I learn AI for this project, I'll be knowledgeable about it for future projects, so that time investment could be spread over different ponds or different abilities. And then what can you do to have things happen for you? And that's really having like a pull market strategy, where what we're doing today is putting a lot of quality information out with the hope that people who see it, hear it, and appreciate it say, hey, I'd like to get to know you, versus always out there selling, promoting. And that's transactional in most cases. I've got a deal today, I've got a special tomorrow. It's not bad depending on who you are, how you like to do things. So there is no absolute here. There's nothing universal. Some people are really good at balancing a lot more than others and are still successful at it. And other people, they're a one trick pony, if you want to call it. They do what they do really well, but they don't meander or wander. But that's part of life, and I think you got to be not a risk taker, but a calculated risk taker. You don't have to dive in. You could put your toe in the water, then eventually your foot, come back to it, because at the beginning it's nothing. And when it's nothing, there's nothing to lose. It's only when you actually commit to it, take the initiative, that now you've got skin in the game. Now you've got time and effort already applied. But, the more initiatives you do take, the more you learn about taking initiatives. Success can breed more success, and failure can breed more failure, depending on what you learn from it, who you met with it. Sometimes you get into something that didn't work out, but because of who you met in that initiative, it could carry forward into a better initiative. And sometimes you got to learn before you earn. And I think patience, I think having some self-control, not getting panicky or overexcited, because I've found anything that's really good will be there tomorrow. And if it's not there tomorrow, it's a very short window anyways. So you want to be in something that you can sustain, you can scale, and why not take something that'll serve you well for the next 5 years? Because once you can get all your ducks in a row, you're not looking for more. You're just looking to do better with what you have. And what's funny is usually more shows up, when you're not focused. And I think people subconsciously don't always know how they appear. And if people are under the gun, people kind of sense that. If there's an immediacy or urgency that doesn't reflect on the initiative or the project, you're trying to get ahead of it. And sometimes, and I found myself in this situation, is I can move a lot faster than a lot of other people, and I'm waiting on things. And when you're waiting on things, you got some extra energy, you start adding more to it, and you get further ahead of it. And sometimes you just got to stop where you're going. It's like taking a walk with somebody, and you forgot how fast you're walking. You look over your shoulder, and your wife's a block behind. Now you got to back up. Not only wait for them, you got to go backwards and find them and get them. So, I think what it is over time, you learn to see things in a more settled perspective. You get a little more seasoned. In youth, you see something and you think it's the greatest thing in the world, and you're the master of it. And all of a sudden, life and reality hits you in the face and says, slow down a little. And there's nothing wrong with that. And again, I think that also speaks to stages. You know, if you're single, if you're 22 out of school, you can live on nothing. You have nobody depending on you. You could take risks. You could run out there and do things because, you know, at least you only have to deal with yourself. When you start bringing in responsibilities and accountabilities, it does make you a little bit more aware is that you can't go all or nothing anymore. You know, you can't go all in. And, you know, the other benefit is having good advisors, people, colleagues who can be a sounding board, you know, so it doesn't have to be you even at the beginning. It's like, hey, I'm about ready to initiate something. I value your judgment. Can you take a quick view of this? Tell me what you think. And that might make the difference between, okay, it's going to take more time then. You know, I'll take it back to the drawing board. Or I didn't know I was at top heavy in this area. I'll move that down. And being able to recalibrate as you go is so important because you never end up with a straight line from where you start to where you want to finish. And you might even get surprised on the upside if you're attuned to what is happening around you and what can you do to make those adjustments. It's kind of always like that game, you know, with in Canada where they curling, you know, where they got one guy or gal who throws that rock or whatever they call it down the path, but you got three people or two people with brooms who are just swishing so fast to kind of move it a little bit here, move it a little bit there. And I think you just have to know the position of the initiative, the position of where you play. And I've never been in an initiative that was all mine forever. That's still a hobby at that point. You know, if you can attract people, if you can build interest and support and cooperation, you know, you become that one trick pony and it limits you. So with that, Karl, what can you find of what I just said that you can have something even better to say?
Well, I think it's interesting you're describing the maturation of an individual from somebody in their youth and 20s going to somebody my age. And your perception of the world changes as you have more and more experiences to build upon. It is interesting. Some people don't learn much. They seem to have the same thought process in their 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever that they had in their 20s, and you kind of wonder how did they get from one point to another without being changed by time and everything that occurs. But risk tolerance, what a person is capable of withstanding in terms of failure, can change radically over time. A lot of people who are my age or older have already said, I'm not taking any more major risk. I'm going to start reducing my risk tolerance to make sure that I don't do something at the wrong time in the wrong place that puts me in a position where I cannot retire or I cannot take care of my medical and healthcare situation. And so you see people in making intentional changes while at the same time there are people who seem not to recognize the risk, who continue to take challenges, who may go down to the um, casino and play roulette for hours on end, and you're like, well, the odds are well stated there, and they're all against you. So why are you continuing to play a game that you cannot win? The more you play, it's kind of an irony where if you know the odds are against you, why participate in the game at all? Which is why I don't get into those games of chance, games of skill like poker or backgammon. Now, a totally different matter. We can talk about that on a different day. Uh, but yeah, I find that a lot of times I do stuff that most of the world would fairly say that's high risk. And it is. It's like one of those things you see warnings on TV where the guy's driving the car down the, you know, mountain at high speed and it goes, this is done by professionals, you should not do this. And I feel the same way about a number of the opportunities that I participate in, that they are completely unknown. You cannot predict the outcome. And as a consequence of that, they are high risk. Now, the risk may vary in terms of consequence, meaning I might get into it for $10, like buying a lottery ticket, or it may require $100,000 or $1 million to get into it. And the larger the dollar amount, the higher risk it is in that form. But that probability of an outcome is a different factor, separate from the amount of money involved. So it's interesting when I talk about risk, I'm looking at, well, what I think the outcome is going to be from a probability standpoint. I don't get too concerned with the dollar amounts. And it's one of these old sayings in raising funding. It's as easy to raise $5 million as it is to raise $50,000. You're going to go through the same work and effort. The background story to get the money is pretty much the same. It's just a matter of scale and who you're talking to. And your relative, investor is, they don't have $5 million. You shouldn't be talking to them about a $5 million investment. But I think it's important for people who are going to take on initiatives that they get some perspective on the outcome that can occur. Is it going to justify the risk associated with that initiative? And this is something, again, in talking with different people, they're like, well, I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I said, then you can't predict.
Mm-hmm.
And you made a comment, earlier about, well, if this happens, then we can go out and buy a new house. And I've seen a lot of people talk themselves into doing something because the reward is really good. It's high, it's great, but the reward and the risk are not related. It's a myth in the industry. They go, the greater the risk, the greater the reward. Not true at all. There are high risk, low rewards. There are the reverse, and everything in between. So as you're thinking about doing something, before you jump, the best thing you can do is try to get as many people who have good or better perspectives than your own to take a look at that initiative and give you feedback. That's the purpose of having a team, a board, a set of advisors, friends and associates, your customers. In the fundraising world, there's a description of testing the waters, where before you actually start a fundraiser, you put a straw person type of a proposal on the table and go, what do you think? And enough people go thumbs up, you go, okay, then I can sell this and I can move to market. It's like a market survey in advance of a product release. The problem is that most of the people that you're pitching don't have the capability of making that decision, or you don't have a large enough base. You need 1,000 investors and you talk to 5. Are they a proper sample of the larger number that you need to succeed? So but the more information you can collect, the more perspectives you can get on a new initiative, the better you can triangulate on how well this may actually turn out. What is the outcome, the probability of the outcome likely to be? That doesn't mean it isn't worthwhile, and it doesn't mean that the risk is not something you may want to assume, but you want to go in eyes open, as they say, instead of jumping off the cliff and crossing your fingers that you're going to have build an airplane or a parachute before you hit the ground.
Yeah, those are wonderful points. What brings to mind is risk tolerance, and the direct relationship is how much do you have, how much can you lose and still feel like you're not changing your lifestyle or your future. But part of risk tolerance is your composition as an individual. If you're going to worry every minute about something that is yet to be done, it's going to impact how you treat that initiative. And you've got to be happy to understand some things are longer term. Don't have false expectations. Don't get crushed as soon as something doesn't work as well as you think it will. And some people just shouldn't be into any sort of risk that will make them less of who they were before they got into the proposition. Because like Karl says, that could affect bankruptcies, divorces, family relationships, personal health. Now you're risking way too much. If it's just a numbers game and a money game, at least it's easy to quantify and qualify in some sense. The other thing about initiative is, like Karl alluded to, in games of chance, they're usually controlled by the house, right? They make the odds. I mean, and you can do as simple as sports betting, right? Every week there's tons of games, and now there's sports betting on everything and anything. I was actually watching the World Series since the Tigers are in this year. And even in the eighth inning, if a team's up 5-3, it'll say 87% chance of winning. You can make a bet right there and get 6-1, hoping the team comes back. You know, who kicked the first field goal? Who had the first penalty? There's a zillion bets. And it really doesn't serve people who have a gambling addiction very well, because there's just too much activity. Some people can make a bet, put it in their drawer, come back to the next day and look at the score, and they have served themselves well, because they would have been biting their nails for 3 hours on every penalty and everything. And it usually comes down to the last play of the game. And you're better served by just not turning it on until the last play of the game, because you didn't need everything in between. But the beauty of being an entrepreneur is now you get to create the rules. You get to invite the players, and that gives you a lot more control and hopefully a sense of foundation to yourself. And the odds are the odds, right? Numbers don't lie. You know, if it's 3-2, it's not 2-1. And if 3-2 serves you well, and again, it's in context. There's people who can gamble relative to what they have, and it's not really gambling. You know, if you got $1 billion and you want to play $1,000 on a football game, it's nothing. Still $1,000, but if all you had was $2,000 and you lost 50% of it on a football game, you'd probably have a hard time explaining it to anybody around you, including yourself. So why not create the game, control the odds, and come out at least with an edge going in? You know, so if you know that every time you do $1 worth of business, 20 cents drops to the bottom line, then it's just a matter of how many more dollars can you do. And time will serve you well if you initiate at the right time, the right way, and know how to build on it. Then time's your friend. If you have, like Karl had mentioned, poor cash flow, pressure, turnover, all of a sudden now you're in more ponds in the same pond. Well, you still got a ton of other ponds, and you got to be careful of that, because you have to know how far can you be spread thin. And that also applies. I talk to so many people and see so many people that are overwhelmed already, and they're not even done with the project, and there's more to come. And that really takes away from the pleasure of participating, but also without that ability to review efforts, plan for new initiatives, you're just playing catch up. Maybe you're chasing a great deal that just blew up, and that's great to a point. It's like an oil well. You always see those movies with the gushers. That's wonderful, but you gotta cap it at a certain point, or all the oil is just going to go up in the air, and you're not going to get anything from it. So it's really being nimble, being aware, being honest with yourself in the situation. Too many people got rosy glasses. I mean, and there's a definite benefit to being positive, having a great attitude, but realism really comes back to you. And I would always err on the side of understanding, and it always has been the case in major initiatives, everything tends to take longer and cost more than you could ever anticipate. And unless you have a reserve built in to say, you know, I'm going to need $1 million with this, but I'm going to have $500,000 backing me up. Because one wise thing, my partner that I always allude to, he always dealt with paid up inventory, with a huge amount of cash in the bank. And during tough times, he was buying up all the competitors who didn't have that. Right? Because now he can do what he wanted instead of what he was forced to do. How many people have to sell off things that are worth keeping, but because they're land rich and cash poor, or whatever the case, they've got to make adjustments. And it usually is a setback. It's definitely a disappointment. It's like playing Monopoly and you had all these hotels, and all of a sudden you start landing on everybody else's property, and those hotels had to get cashed out at a discount. And again, because of the diversity of initiatives and conditions involved, professionals are justified because people don't look at the impact somebody could have by just adjusting things for you, saying, no, this is going to take a year, not 6 months. You know, you got to keep that in mind. And here's why. It's not, again, because being a prognosticator that you can see the future, but you can understand what the past has shown you to be and what the conditions are. And it's a lot easier as you're more of a veteran because you've been down this road before. You know, naturally, not every road is the same, but yeah, or just like with people. I met this person, it's just like Jim from 12 years ago, same situation, you know, and now that I have that benefit, and maybe that's the benefit of disappointment and failure, is you got reference for the future. And I always say, I always learn more on the way down than the way up because it's so humbling. It builds humility, but it also makes you aware of what is important. And some people's best thing was their worst failures. You know, some people who just rode a rising star or a shooting star up never had a chance to really appreciate the ride, but also didn't always know how they got there and how they can rescale to that in the future. So positioning is important. You know, if you're going to be here for a long time, there is no urgency to anything that doesn't itself require urgency. You know, you can't move time faster than time will move, and you can't move people farther where they'll go. You know, you can't drag people across the finish line. And at a certain point, you got to reevaluate. You know, they say quitters never win and winners never quit. Well, when you find out you're already lost, it's time to quit. And I think that's important. Sometimes, you know, it's not the odds. It's like this, the game has changed. It's not what I wanted. It's not bringing me any joy, and I don't see a future. Well, that's enough red flags to say, okay, you know, I did my best, whatever the case, I'm trying something new. And maybe that's a good thing to put back on the shelf. How many people have hobbies or books they read and they got to halfway through the book and it's not as fun, it's not as interesting, put it back on the shelf, and they find out 6 months later they revisit it and now they can restart it and get completion. So again, professionals are important. And again, depending on who the professional is, just because you got a brother-in-law who you can really trust, who has maybe he's a dentist, has no knowledge of what you're talking about. He's trying, but you're tapping into a dry well. And that's where you have your ability to pivot here, reach out here. Anything you do outside of what you're doing is more for context, reference, and direction. And then how do you bring people in? And do you bring certain people in? Some people have core competencies that are really pertinent to what you're doing. Other people, you might have to wait. I know individuals like Irwin Jack, which always amazes me, being able to do 50 million to 5 billion in financing. I saw he had a post today that he just completed something or is involved in some $112 million project. Well, that's a whole different atmosphere. But like Karl says, you know, sometimes bigger money deals are easy to do than small money deals because you're usually dealing with big money people. You know, when you get a new person and you say, well, you got to put in $1,000, it's like, and they've never done that. That almost seems like the end of the world. Someone who's done deals every week or every month, depending on their scale, it wouldn't touch a deal under a certain point. You know, like Karl says, it just doesn't justify the resources or the effort, and they're already positioned for those situations, so it's not a surprise. So, you know, I can see, Karl, why the funding field attracts you so much, because you have done so much, so many initiatives, but also referred to so many quality books and publications. And I think that's the other thing, is knowing where to look when you do have questions, and how fast can you find reliable answers or reliable people to kind of bridge that gap. So what advice would you have for people who are moving into things that aren't comfortable always, because there are new initiatives, or there are new initiative types of situations that require certain capabilities that someone's not actually in a position for?
Um, I one time described entrepreneurship like rock climbing. I took a course in Denver Free University a number of years ago, and essentially, when you climb up the side of a mountain on a face of rock, you have to have a point on the rock face where you hold yourself. This is your point of balance or your point of support. But you're constantly moving across the face and having to shift your point of balance from one point to another. And it takes a little bit of skill, a little bit of talent to identify that point and move to that point in a safe fashion, which is why you have ropes in case you made a mistake. It hopefully is not a long fall, it's a short fall off of the rope. As entrepreneurs, by comparison, you're doing the same thing. You're moving from a point of known uh, opportunity to one of unknown opportunity. This is an initiative of change. And the more experience you get, the faster you can move across the face of the rock, because you can see quicker, identify better, and know what and how you're going to get to the next move, to the next step down the road. But when you start, you have none of these experiences, none of these skills. There are very few people who are natural, talented entrepreneurs who succeed during their first 100 steps. Most of the people I know, it's one step forward, two, three, five steps back, which is part of the learning curve, figuring out what works and doesn't work. So as you get ready to undertake an initiative, it is a matter of thinking through, do I have the skill? Do I have the resources necessary to move to the next step? And because you've never done it before, you have to have that reserve or that allowance for what you don't know. And the more you look at something and you don't know, probably the bigger the reserve should be. And I see the biggest failures are where people leaped without really understanding what they were doing or where they were going, and reality smacks them into the ground at high speed, and they basically they have to get up, dust themselves up, but they may be in the hospital for a few months before they have the chance to even stand up. You want your moves to be beneficial. You want them to be growth and help you along the path. And so you want them to be big enough to be meaningful, but you have to do it, with concern for what you don't know, what is not within your potential skill base, which is why maybe you get that outside opinion. You add somebody to your team. Maybe you build up your reserves before you take the jump. Uh, where people get into as much trouble or more trouble is once they overreach. They, as we reach over our head all the time trying to attain new goals. Sometimes you reach too far. You can't get there from here. And at that point, there's a tendency to make what I call desperate moves. Oh, I've got to salvage this situation. I'm going to throw good money after bad. We've got all these phrases of, no, you should have backed off. You should have waited. You should have paused. You should have reevaluated whether this opportunity makes sense. Maybe you need to kill it off and go do something else, rather than continue to plunge forward saying, well, the original idea sounded good, looked good. That house is still sitting there on the hill I want to buy if we succeed, and using that as a motivation to get there. You constantly have to test what you're doing against reality. And if you don't know something, then you have to allow for what you don't know can hurt you.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it, because what we're really saying at the foundation of initiative is support, right? When you're climbing a mountain, you need support. Either it's people around you or equipment that supports you. And a lot of times you can outrun the team. So, how do you run at a pace that everybody can follow or keep up with? And then who can take the lead when you need to fall back or back away, like vacations? There's some people that say they can't take any time off because they got everything going and everybody needs them. I used to think like that. In the early days, my mother had a little place in Palm Beach, and as a family, we'd go down there every year. And I remember in the beginning, I would go from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday and come back on Monday, and the rest of my group would be there for another week. And I had that sense that, hey, every day I'm away, it's costing the business something, or I'm missing something. And what I found over time is the more time I took away on those vacations, two things happened. I found myself being refreshed, being able to get away and be more objective about things that you get caught up in. But also, everybody I left behind became more self sufficient, because they didn't have to wait for me to make a decision. They could make decisions for me and for the business and for themselves. And it made for a stronger situation, because too many people are short sighted. They look at their world as them instead of everybody with them. And at a certain point, if you can't, I met a guy who built a fabulous chemical business in Boston. And he said, if you have a business you can't leave, you don't have a business. So if that's how thin you're running, everything is on you, it's on you, or you're going to collapse on it. And it's the long term you got to look at. I mean, you're going to have losses, and without taking a little risk, you'll never have a loss, but you'll never have a big gain. And again, what's comfortable? If you're comfortable with a paycheck and knowing it's there, and that used to be the case, but that's no longer the case. Everybody today is working for themselves, no matter who's signing the check, because everybody's looking at, how do I get more productivity? How do I reduce expenses? Loyalty isn't the same, and it applies to someone running a business. And that's why certain businesses, like restaurants, I think are the worst businesses in the world, because food has to be fresh, it has to turn. You got to have happy, quality service staff, and that's not easy to find. And you're actually competing in areas that aren't fair. Some of the policies and situations are already in place, and why not just go for something where the wind's at your back, like live streaming, like drones, like AI? Move over. And if you don't have anything, you get first pick. It's a lot harder if you've got an established business to get out of it, to get into something. But while you have is a beginning, and like we talked about youth, you can work forever for nothing and it doesn't bother you. And that's usually why you see some of these guys like Elon or Bill Gates, who started their businesses in their 20s out of a garage and were able to do it. But if they would have been 50, 60 years old with all these responsibilities, they wouldn't have had the risk tolerance or the ability. And I think it also says, when something shows up, take advantage of it. Opportunity doesn't knock all the time. And it doesn't hurt to be a part of somebody else's bigger thing. Let someone else who knows what they're doing train you, bring you in, help you build them, and eventually you could branch out on yourself. And I think that applies to Karl's earlier point, is, being able to learn from others, grow with others. Some people go into MBA programs and graduate and then go off to JP Morgan or whatever. And for 3-4 years, they're getting the best of the best, which is a real life extension of education. And then at that point, they're in better position to go off on their own and meet people. And it's really the people who can make all the difference. I mean, people will open doors. What will get you through the door. But it does help to have people who can put a kind word in for you, make a reference for you, and don't be all in one as far as an island onto yourself. So we covered quite a bit. We're at 59:55, 5 seconds left. Karl, always a pleasure to have you. Final thoughts you might have?
I think that we've covered a lot of turf today, talking about what is an initiative and what constitutes initiative. And this is something that every entrepreneur, anyone who wants to make a change in their life, career-wise, personally, they have to do something different. And that's an initiative. And initiatives come with risks, they come with challenges, and better preparation, better thought, better strategy may enable you not only to accomplish the initiative you undertake, but to do it with less pain and suffering.
I'm all for that. Less pain and suffering. And on the other side, on a positive note, there are a lot of people who take the initiative and come out hugely successful in all areas of their life. So it isn't just the risk side, it's the reward side that comes with it that justifies the risk. You know, I mean, if you're getting even money versus 10-1, it's a different bet. So with that, I want to thank Karl again. I want to thank the audience for the wonderful comments and participation and support. Welcome everybody to tomorrow's show with Kelly and Dave. And actually, we'll be back Monday with Dave again. And